Welcome
Welcome
to Modern Mind,
Ancient
Book,
where
we together explore one of the most important books in human history. Okay, Nick, welcome to Modern Mind, Ancient Book. Today we're going to do a survey of the Book of Judges. Now, I've already done this, but I felt like it was not done well, and I wanted to redo it, particularly having you present today. So welcome to Modern Mind, Ancient Book. Would you mind telling the audience a little about yourself?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Appreciate the invitation. I am a Connecticut native down here in South Carolina now, and grateful to know all the cool people that I've met. I'm a musician, but I also enjoy acting and building and basically any creative endeavor that isn't dancing, because the Lord did not gift me in that arena.
And you also work at the local church.
That is correct. Yep, the youth ministry, and that has been a tremendous blessing. And I was just telling them this morning that it was unimaginably better than my own experience as a member of the youth group. Now leading one, they're doing phenomenally well, and the Lord's moving in their lives.
All right. Cool. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your Sunday to come over here after church today. I certainly have enjoyed worshiping with you and learning about you, and I really do enjoy manning First Assembly of God.
Amen, brother.
Thank you. Okay, so the title of this book in Hebrew is Shofetim, which means judges, rulers, or deliverers. In the Septuagint, it's Kritai, which just means judges. So this is one of those books where you have overlap. The names are not different. It's the exact same name. So Shofetim or Kritai. The date of this book spans 350 years. This is one of those that there's a fair amount of overlap. So in this book, we're going to see Samuel, Ruth, and Judges. All of those take place within this time span. It's the conclusion of the book of Joshua, and it goes all the way through the death of Samson. At least that's the last easily dated date. So 1370 BC to 1055 BC.
Right.
It is a historical review of Israel's conquests and compromises during the Joshua period. The book ends with stories of apostasy that are difficult to date. That's why the death of Samson is the last dateable. Because I'm not sure how aware the audience is or how aware the biblical world at large is, but the Bible itself as a collection has been edited.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
And so over time, they were finalized in a sense, right? And the most likely time of that finalization of the collection was during the Babylonian captivity. The people of Israel were taken to a place that highly prized academic prowess. And the best of Israel was taken and put into the king's court and taught record keeping, among other things. And so a lot of these works were finalized probably around that date, which is what makes it difficult to get a date sort of at the end of the book, right?
Makes sense.
So these stories are very well thought out, and all the books of the Bible are very interconnected with one another.
Absolutely. That's one of the amazing things about the Bible, considering how long of a span it was for everything to be written to be that well connected, not contradictory. As much as some people would like to believe that it is, the self-referencing is some of the best evidence
of its at least organization, if not divine work.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Depending if you're faithful or not.
Right.
Right. So the early date is pretty easy to find because there's a theme that says there was no king in Israel. So it's before the king's period, but after the Joshua period. It does argue for the kingdom period, meaning, and the reason why I actually wanted to redo this is because there are motifs that up until this point have made themselves evident. So you have this suffering servant go down, Joseph, You have a man called an Avram. You have his sons who become a nation. You have 12 called into service to God.
Right.
You have called out from twice, because you have Abraham, and then you have Moses and the people down in Egypt. And then you have the creation of a nation, the proper worship of God, and the administration of a theocracy, which is how Israel became a nation. They got a tabernacle, and they became a camp around the tabernacle. So they became a theocracy. They were given 10 names, 10 ways of living. We call them commandments, but really it's like who and how do you identify? Because the gods around them had their ways,
right.
But Israel had their ways based on their God.
They're separated.
Yeah, yes. And then they became more and more of a nation as more and more people needed more and more administration. You get Jethro. So in this, you can already see there's these motifs that are happening where you have Gentiles who come into the nation. There are Egyptians and there are Midianites, Jethro and his family, that loved the God that Moses worships. Maybe Jethro taught Moses, maybe, right? So you have these themes, these motifs that are already starting to come. And now the motif in this is that you have the creation of the nation, you have their rulership by God, and then you have their rejection of God. Now, before we get too concerned with Israel being a stiff-necked people, we've done it too.
That absolutely.
All through history.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, early date, no kings in Israel. That's how we know. After Joshua, before Saul, right? There are other important things about how Israel as a nation records, right? They have a history of very well established, faithful historiography. And this particular collection is a very, very good sign of that, because it wasn't over the lifetime of one person. It was over the lifetime of many people. It was 350 years of history that's recorded in this one book. So the purpose of this book is to encourage the nation to turn away from idolatry.
Right.
To turn away from kings and priests that look appealing to them, but it's not the king and priestly line of Yahweh, their God. The purpose of this book is for them to remain faithful to Yahweh and his covenant. The key verse of this is, if you want to read it, are you there?
Yes, the
key verse.
Judges, there. Yes, okay. Yeah. So they forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtaroth. And the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of plunderers who plundered them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies around them, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Then the Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
And that's the interesting thing about it, because it should read, of a faithful people, they all did what was right according to God and his commandments. But that's not what it says.
No, it is not what it says at all.
Because that's how people are. So, the recipients of this book, since it was written during the transitional period from Saul to David, the first recipients were Israelites who cried out to Samuel, their prophet, "Behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the other nations." These people rejected Yahweh from being king over them. The warning of Joshua that they would serve the Lord had come true. Now, does it matter? No, because God has a plan. And that's why the motifs in these things matter. So, when we read these books, we shouldn't see an evil, horrible nation. We should be introspective. First, learn who they are, what they were, why they did what they did, but also understand that in the midst of wanting another king, in the midst of worshiping Baal and Ashtaroth and other gods, he still brought up faithful judges to lead them, and gave them a king who, by all means, in the beginning was kind of faithful, and then raised up David underneath of that man, which is yet another motif of one like Joseph, who was made as nothing, who was unjustly treated, but then became the head. Right? So that's the way it is. These are these motifs that run through here. So the basic layout of this book is the early part, the sin, that Joshua didn't complete the task of pushing out all of the people, of destroying the Canaanites, the Kanaf, those who are to be marginalized, the Kanayim, that he didn't finish the job. And then they served Baal, and then they served Ashtaroth. Because the influence of the people, their kings and their ways, which probably look pretty great, right? So you have temple prostitutes, so you get to go have fun. Right? You get to worship the one who brings rain, and Baal gives you food and sustenance. It's more immediate, right? It's not the God of the heavens who is far away, seemingly, but it's the God Baal that's right there, and he's going to give you rain every time you pray for it.
Right, and when you were mentioning this earlier and talking about, not viewing them through this lens of, oh, what a wicked people, and if we don't see ourselves or our potential to be the same way, we're deceived.
That's right. Yeah, these stories are here to place us where we belong.
Right.
The law, as the New Testament says, is the master that leads us to repentance, right? Yeah. So you have the sin, and then you have servitude, and then you have generational cycles where the people cry out for someone to remove the evil over the people, because they were ruled by people who didn't believe the way they did and who were unfair to them.
We have no idea about that.
Yeah. You're not wrong. So the people sinned and they fell. There's something there to be learned.
Yeah.
And then they reached out to God, who in turn gave them judges that delivered them for a time. And these people, this is actually an interesting thing to me, because we go to church. We're New Covenant people. Right? Now, I imagine not everybody that listens to this podcast will be believers in God, but there's something to be learned here, in that if you do wrong, you pay a price for it, right? These are just instrumental realities, okay? So in religion, that's true. But the interesting thing is, does it mean that you can never fight as a Christian? That you can never, cut somebody open for trying to take your life or for being an oppressor to you? Because what we learn in the Old Testament is that the judges that God rose up were very much warlike people.
Oh yeah, they were hardcore.
Yeah. Now, is it the same as today? That's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. I'm glad that you didn't jump into immediately saying no, because that seems to be the knee-jerk for a lot of people, is to say, oh, well, it's different now, New Covenant, and it's all been removed. And so we don't properly understand who we're supposed to be unless we understand this.
I believe that. I do believe that. So when I look out in the world, let's just be practical. Let's take it out of the Bible right now. When I look out into the world, do I see people that don't cut other people's heads off? I do. I see people who will cut your head off and leave it at your mom's door.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see people who would disembowel you and hang you on crosses, because all that happened with ISIS.
Right.
Yeah. And so in the world today, there is still great evil. And God could bring us a deliverer. In fact, he will, who will conquer evil. That's what it says.
Yeah.
So this, I think, is an interesting thing to understand in today's context, in that the whole counsel of this has meaning. And so who we are today should necessarily consider the fact that Jesus said, well, now I tell you, buy a cloak and take your sword with you. Right?
Right.
So each person listening and each individual can determine how they would live that out in their own lives. But for me and my house, I will defend life in God's name. That's the way I feel about that. From that comes salvation. So there are judges, and then there are salvation. So far we've got sin, servitude, generational cycles with supplication that bring judges, and this is the major breakdowns of this book. And then salvation. You've got Samson. Samson actually finally conquers, right? Because he destroys that temple with all the leaders and everything in it. And then from there, there's safety, sort of. But none of this is everlasting, right? This is just the workup of this particular book. Now, the way of reading this particular book matters because we just had a modern conversation, but you don't ever approach a biblical document from today's understanding, right? That's why this podcast is called Modern Mind, Ancient Book,
right?
Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to read this according to the way the author meant it to the recipients.
Right, based on what the recipients would have understood, not what we understand or think we understand from it, right?
That's right. So we got to use a little imagination. So you would be a person living under a human king of the people's choice, Saul in this case. Israel has had some victories, but it's also facing some possible defeats. There are foreign nations still in the land. In particular, the Philistines, and read a little bit about them. They are very violent people. There are brutal people with many chariots. There are Egyptians, Hittites, and other nations fighting for important trade routes. Saul is an unstable king, and you don't know the direction that the nation will take. Young David is seen as a rival to Saul, and there's national tension about who will be the next leader. You are given the book of Judges so that you can understand the state of your current national problems. You must read Judges to learn how compromise with sin leads to serious consequences. These people did not have a division between natural and supernatural. Everything was supernatural. Everything was God's. Prayers and life and everything was governed by one God or the other, depending on your nation. Right. In fact, dirt belongs to God. The Baals had their dirt, and Yahweh had his dirt. And everything in that circle revolved around proper worship and proper obedience. And that's the way the people lived their lives. So the Lord God is challenging, and this is how you have to imagine yourself while reading this book. The Lord God is challenging you to covenant with him. You must avoid the mistakes of the past, and you have to look at Yahweh as your king. You must build up your faith so that you believe that under Yahweh and his choice king, Israel can be led into battle to possess the promised land and prosper in the peace of God. Everything hinges on faith.
Right. That absolutely makes sense. And it is really interesting because, like you were saying, we're not supposed to understand these things from a modern perspective. Otherwise, we're not truly understanding them at all. And on the other hand, if we just learn these things for the historical aspect and don't, for lack of a better term, imagine ourselves in that situation, then we don't apprehend these lessons.
That's right. If it's not personal, it's not real to a degree.
Right. So it does have to enter the modern mind.
Yes. But in the context of the author,
yes,
and the original recipients.
Right.
Then you take meaning from it. That's why I said there are motifs that we should be carrying throughout the process. Right?
Absolutely.
So we've got a few things that are important. So descendants, genealogies, these are important. The Amalekites descended from Esau. The Ammonites descended from Lot's youngest daughter. The Amorites were part of the people that were already there, and they had the giants, Og of Bashan. Bashan are bulls that are worshipped as gods. The Canaanites, this one's interesting. So the root of this is kanaf. It's the people who are to be marginalized. We don't know who Canaanites are because it's a word that Israelis made up that defined the land that was theirs. They were the Kanaim, the people to be marginalized, pushed out, and destroyed.
Right.
They were actually a collection of people. But it's a way that was used. Now, did they have a specific reality about them? Yes, they did. They certainly did. They worshipped Baal and Ashtaroth, and they actually had a very similar priestly system. Now, one might assume that that story of Melchizedek perhaps plays a part in this, because perhaps the religion of Melchizedek became less than righteous and became this form, right? So there's some historical things maybe that play into this. That's an area of research I'd like to get a little bit more into. But these people led Israel into bad worship, right? Because they were left in the land. But they should have been marginalized. It's a play on word. They're the ones who should have been pushed out. Kanaim. The Edomites were descendants of Esau. The Hittites are people that Esau married into. They should have never been left. The Hivites were descendants of Canaan.
Right.
The Jebusites were Canaanites. The Mesopotamians are where Abraham came from. The Midianites are related to Keturah, Abram's concubine. The Moabites are descendant of Lot and his daughter. The Perizzites, they were people on the coastal plain. They were Canaanites. The Philistines descended from Kalushim, the son of Mizraim, the son of Ham. The Phoenicians, they are an interesting people. They're actually people that Israel collaborated with to build the temple later, or earlier, I'm sorry, but became enemies, just like the Midianites. Jethro was a Midianite. So those genealogies are super important. It takes time to ascertain exactly what that means, but don't skip over the genealogies. They do matter. Right.
Well, and I think that's a temptation that I've fallen into, to just look at that and say, why does this matter? If you're not dissecting it in the way that you have put forth, it almost just seems like filler for the sake of it. And there's nothing in the Bible that is just filler for the sake of it.
There's nothing in the Bible that's filler for the sake of it. All of it is planned, and it matters. So the argument of this book is, Yahweh delivers Israel from foreign oppressors by his Spirit. The Spirit enters here. That's another motif. After Israel repents of her idolatry and apostasy.
Thank you for joining us. Come back soon.
Thank you for joining us for Modern Mind, Ancient Book. We hope that the time spent with us was valuable for you. It certainly was for us. Like Isabella said, please come back soon.